Welcome, everybody. I'm so delighted to have you join us. It's a special occasion. I want to thank Noemi for helping out and the JCC for sponsoring us and facilitating this. I know there's a lot of hate out there in the world right now, and what you're going to hear tonight should give you some hope. It's if there are more people like Alan and the others who participated in the trial that he's going to be talking about, this will be a much better place. So so I said, Leslie, do a little research. And I want to introduce Alan properly, and she gave me a page and a half of his accomplishments, and we're not going to go through this. But I will say that Alan is senior counsel at the international law firm of Cooley. He served as an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York, where he played a key role in the investigation and prosecution of union corruption of the New York City waterfront. That's an indication that he was tough enough to take on this assignment. I'm going to skip mentioning most of his many awards and accomplishments and public service activities. So we do have time to hear his story and hear about the current grave threat to democracy that and his part in doing something about it. But here's a few of his accomplishments. He's been repeatedly recognized by his peers, asked to assume leadership roles over his career in the American College of Trial Lawyers, the Legal Aid Society, the American Bar Association, and the New York State Bar Association. He was chairman of the board of the Legal Aid Society and represented the Legal Services Corporation in a landmark case, which he argued before the United States Supreme Court. He is currently chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And last but not least, he is a loving husband, father, grandfather, brother, and cousin to the Camel sisters, Leslie, Lisa, and Flo. And Leslie and Lisa, as many of you know, reside here in Ann Arbor. And indeed, they're the reason that Alan is here. Because Leslie and Lisa said, oh, you gotta have our cousin Alan on. He make an amazing guest. And I had the opportunity to talk to him. I said, yeah, he'd make an amazing guest. And he kindly agreed to it. So Alan, please tell us about the events in Charlottesville that led up to this litigation. What happened?
You guys have all night?
No, actually we do not, but hit the highlights for us.
Okay, so on August 11th and 12th of 2017, all the white nationalist organizations in the United States organized a weekend rally, supposedly to object to the removal of the Robert E. Lee statute in Charlottesville, Virginia. But the real purpose, as the evidence showed, was to have a white supremacist rally to, as we proved, to commit racially motivated violence against Jews, Black people, and their supporters. There was a permitted speech rally planned for Saturday morning for all the leaders of the white supremacist movements in the United States. There was a planned but unpermitted and undisclosed rally Friday night, which was a torch march that went from one part of the University of Virginia campus through the historic grounds 400 or 500 people chanting, "Jews will not replace us. You will not replace us. Blood and soil and into the ovens." And these 400 or 500 men dressed primarily in white shirts and khakis marched in double or triple file through the campus and then to the rotunda where the Thomas Jefferson statue sits, and surrounded and attacked about 25 people that were locked arm in arm around the statue. Saturday morning, they had marches and demonstrations to get to the park where the permitted rally was to take place. And the marches were all deliberately intended to provoke violence with counter-protesters that were lining the streets. There was such mayhem and violence that unlawful assembly was declared by the state police. The crowd was disbanded before the rally ever took place. And several hours later, one of the individual participants who marched in the rally in the morning drove his Dodge Challenger down one of the Charlottesville streets deliberately into a crowd of peaceful counter-protesters, killing one of the counter-protesters, a young 20-some-odd-year-old woman, and injuring dozens of others. There were a number of people injured Friday night. There were a number of people injured Saturday, and of course, people injured from the car attack. I was one of lawyers in 3 law firms that filed a complaint in October on behalf of about 10 people that were injured under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1867.
Alan, if I
Yeah.
could interrupt for a moment, how did you get involved? What prompted you to get involved?
So we filed that complaint in October. But back in the end of August, I was sitting in shul on Shabbat out in the Hamptons, the little tiny community shul for the conservative synagogue of the Hamptons, sitting next to a friend of mine, a lawyer by the name of Roberta Kaplan. And she told me that she was thinking of bringing a lawsuit against the white supremacists that had caused all of the violence and injury. And I turned to her during services and said, if you're going to do that case, I'd love to do it with you. And she said, really, will you do the Nazis? And I said, of course I'll do the Nazis. That would give me great pleasure.
According to an article I read or something, when she was interviewed, she was thinking, who would be better to depose the Nazis than you? Why might she have thought that? What was there about your character, experience?
First, Robbie and I have known one another for almost 30 years, done a number of cases together when she was a younger associate even. You know, there are different cases throughout my career, including the prosecution of the waterfront, where I've earned a reputation of being combative on behalf of my clients. And so I guess she was thinking that might be a good fit.
I've also heard you being described as tenacious.
Yes. And actually, one of the defendants organizations described me as the most obnoxious lawyer in the courtroom, which I
presume
regarded.
you took as a compliment.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. They were not easy to cross-examine. So anyway, we brought that lawsuit. It went to trial in October. It was a 5-week trial, and the jury returned a verdict against all the defendants, awarding the plaintiffs between compensatory damages and punitive damages a total of $26 million. The case is waiting now final motions in front of the trial judge, and then there'll be appeal, and then hopefully the case will be affirmed and we'll start collecting the money on behalf of the plaintiffs.
Well, we now have a very good outline of the story. Let's start to fill in some of it. What was the division of labor between you and your fellow lawyers? Who did what?
Well, we had 3 law firms, and basically we divided up the plaintiffs. Each law firm took a couple of plaintiffs. We divided up the defendants. Each law firm took a couple of defendants, and then we worked together collaboratively on the overall strategy for the whole case.
And how many plaintiffs were there, and how many defendants?
There were I think 9 plaintiffs. There were over 15 defendants. There were a number of defaults, and I think we ultimately went to trial with 7 individual defendants and a number of organizations.
You described this as not, the purpose of this rally was not over the statue itself, but because there was a desire to provoke violence, and particularly towards Jews and Black people. What evidence was there that this was directed towards Jews and Blacks?
So that's really the crux of the case. We had to prove under the statute, both the federal statute and the state statute, that the defendants committed racially motivated violence against Jews and Black people and their supporters, that was intended to interfere with those individuals exercising their constitutional rights. And so we had to prove, and the crux of this case, we did prove that this was racially motivated violence, that this was violence that kind of grows out of the white supremacist movement, which it targets Jews and Black people looking for a white America, returning Blacks to Jim Crow status, and literally removing Jews from the population. So we had to prove that this wasn't a political rally about the statues, but rather was politically, racially motivated violence. And there was abundant testimony, sadly. Of course, you had Friday night's rally, which wasn't a political rally at all. It was a torch march, lit flaming torches with people chanting, "Jews will not replace us," with one of the defendants admitting that it was evoked the Ku Klux Klan itself. There were chants Saturday morning. There was all kinds of internet chatter and planning that made it clear that this was all about a white supremacist rally looking to provoke counter-protesters into physical combat.
I understand that Friday night, one of the one of the demonstrators used mace on one of the people around the
A number of them.
statue,
Yeah.
saying something about gassing the kikes.
He actually maced some of the counter demonstrators, and then after the rally bragged how he had gassed the kikes.
Nice group of people. You were responsible for cross-examination?
Of several of the defendants, yes.
Yes. Were you able, tell us about the process and who it was that you were examining?
Well, we, if there are lawyers in the group, particularly appreciate this. To prove our case, we actually called as witnesses the defendants, because we had a lot of internet chatter by the defendants in an internet chat platform as evidence from the several months before. And so we had a lot of what the defendants said and then what they did at the event. So we called them as witnesses and then in effect cross-examined them as part of our direct case. So included in my responsibilities were the leaders, Michael Hill and Michael Tubbs, of an organization called League of the South, which was formed some 20 years ago. It is chapters in 14 states. It's dedicated to white supremacy. Michael Hill is the president. He bragged months before that he was taking a pledge of allegiance, pledging to his membership that he was a racist, an anti-Semite, a homophobe, Islamophobe, and he was dedicated to a white supremacist nation, and called out all of his members to come to Charlottesville. He actually tweeted a month or two before. This was, remember, supposedly a rally to protect the Robert E. Lee statue. He tweeted, "If you want to save Southern democracy and Western civilization from the Jew and his dark-skinned allies, come to Charlottesville 11 and 12 August." So that was the League of the South rallying cry for the event. And, for these defendants, we had to confront them with their animus. We had to prove to the jury a racial animus for each of them. And then we had to prove their participation and advocacy of the violence and connect the two and prove to the jury that the violence was really not about the statue. It was about achieving a white supremacist environment. So each of these defendants had an abundance of evidence for me and for my colleagues to use in cross-examining them.
You've cross-examined, I presume, a lot of witnesses and defendants. Were these guys tough?
They were angry. In a sense, they weren't tough because I was confronting them with what they said and they did. They could dispute the intention, but their words and conduct spoke for itself. And so it was just doing what you do with a difficult adverse party and cross-examining them. You make sure that they answer the question that you ask them. You confront them with actual evidence of what they said or did. And you try to get the judge's assistance to get an answer before you move on to the next question. So some of them fought a little more than others, but these defendants, for the most part, don't dispute their ideology. They don't dispute their views of Black people. They don't dispute their views of Jewish people. They're pretty open and notorious about it. Some of them have these expressions about Jews. I don't hate all Jews. I just hate organized Jewish organizations. So I have some friends that are Jews, but they're all hardcore anti-Semites.
What can you tell us about the jury?
Interesting. First, the jury had masks on. So
is that for COVID or for security reasons?
For COVID. The jury had masks on, and the jurors were spread out actually in the courtroom, and very hard to see their reactions other than with their eyes. And so usually a trial lawyer can identify with the jurors and kind of read jurors' reactions as evidence is coming in. That experience was just didn't happen in this courtroom. But we had 4 Black jurors. We had 8 white jurors. I don't think that we had any people that identified as Jewish. No one did in the questionnaire, but I wouldn't know. And we had a nice educated jury. But of course, we had questionnaires that they filled out, so we knew a certain amount of what their experience was and exposure was to different kinds of views on Black Lives Matter, views on anti-Semitism, views on favorite people, views of Confederate statues, views on whether racism and anti-Semitism were a problem. We had those kinds of things, and we knew what the people did. But the big thing was that we were deprived of connecting with them and reading them individually.
Were there any concerns about the jury being intimidated?
Well, the jurors were told that no one would know their names, that they were all anonymous, except to a limited number of court people. And at the end, after the jury returned its verdict, the court reminded the jurors that no one would ever know their names. No one would ever be able to identify them unless they identified themselves. Interestingly, no juror, so far as I know, has, if you will, made himself or herself public and given any interview. So the jury remains anonymous to this day. I see a question that came up about who is representing these defendants. The 2 of the defendants represented themselves, which was a little unusual.
But I suspect you like that, right?
Pardon?
I suspect you like that, didn't you?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It gave us certain opportunities to examine them, and they had personality conflicts with some of the other defendants, and So that spilled out into the open. The case took a lot longer to try because of them, because their examinations were much, much longer than any of the lawyers. The other lawyers were all basically individual practitioners, a couple from Virginia, one fellow from Kentucky, one person from Pittsburgh. So they were, from around the United States, somewhat sympathetic with the defendants, but not, I don't, except for one of them, not really adherents of the defendants' views.
I think it should be clear that you didn't bill at your usual rate. Is that correct?
My law firms did the whole case pro bono.
And the other law firms?
The other law firms got a portion of some of their work funded by a charitable group. But for the most part, the whole large part of the case was pro bono. My firm had 6 people in Charlottesville for 6 weeks. We invested millions of dollars of time in this case over the 4 years.
I understand that Integrity First America, which is a nonprofit, played a role in this and took responsibility for security. Is that?
Yes, and they're the ones that went out and raised the money for security and for some of the expense, for all of the expenses that firms had.
Yeah, I know it was millions of dollars, as I remember, and they had at least one fundraiser here in Ann Arbor. It was.
I mean, we had full security. So I see somebody said that Amy Spitalnik spoke in Ann Arbor last year. So she was the one for Integrity for America that went around raising money, in part to defray the legal fees, some of the portion of the legal fees of the other firms and the expenses. I mean, we had full security in Charlottesville. I think the law enforcement had really no sense of what the defendants' supporters would do. Some of the defendants had actually called for their supporters to come to Charlottesville to support them. So it was really unclear what level of protection we would need. And we had full security in our hotel, and it took us back and forth to the court every day. And whenever I wanted to go downtown for a drink in the evening, I had the security guards accompanying me to the college bars in Charlottesville.
It must have been an interesting sight. Not your usual college crowd.
No.
Yes. Did you feel safe?
I felt safe.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking, Chuck, you're talking to somebody who, I was 28 when I prosecuted the Gambino crime family.
Okay.
And the FBI told me that I was going to be fine, that they don't really do anything to lawyers. That ended up being true. I mean, one of my witnesses got shot on the eve of trial back in 1979, but no one ever did anything to me. So I
was concerned, but I was careful. Education.
What?
That is a value of a law degree.
Yes. Somebody wrote, "The mob is smarter than white supremacists." Yes, but I think this case and why it's so important. The white supremacists need to know that that people are going to stand up to them and bring them to justice. Not just the government in a criminal case, but that, lawyers on behalf of people that they injured would bring them to justice, hold them to account. And I think, to me, that's the big lesson of this lawsuit and of this experience.
Have there been any other such actions since the trial?
No,
Since the verdict?
no.
Any reason
No.
to believe from, well, I guess you wouldn't know whether there's been a dampening, whether there's been any dampening effect.
Chuck, it's there was an article interesting in the New York Times a year after the event, which discussed how it appeared that the lawsuit and the effects of the rally and the death of the woman, etc., had tamped down the activities of these white supremacist organizations. And some of what they said to themselves after the events shows that. But these people don't speak with one voice. And besides the organizations, they're standalones. And so, shortly after that article, you had the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And the gunman in Pittsburgh, actually, I think there's some evidence of his familiarity with the websites and the organizations of some of the people involved in Unite the Right. And then we have the California Synagogue in Podway, and then we have Fort Worth. So maybe there hasn't been an organized rally designed to create violence against Jews and Blacks in the way that Charlottesville did, but these people are in the country, are in the United States, and they're talking to one another on internet chat rooms, and they're organizing with one another. And it's just, I don't think anyone can say that the lawsuit had the effect of cutting back on the violence. Having said that, I think we need to continue to do these things. When people say, what should we do to fight this kind of anti-Semitism in the country? I've said, there isn't one silver bullet here. Everything. I mean, this lawsuit is important. Demonstrations are important. Funding the ADL is important. The government, the Senate confirming Professor Deborah Lipstadt is important. All of this is, it's a constant battle that we should be engaged in.
What it does seem to have dampened is the organizations getting together for
yes,
that as you
for
said,
sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
because they saw, Chuck, that the statute, both the federal statute and the state hate crime statute, are conspiracy-based statutes. So they provide for cause of action for a violation if two or more people conspire together to commit racially motivated violence. So if a group is going to have an organized rally and all decide they're going to descend on a town in America to do the kinds of things they did in Charlottesville, and somebody gets injured, they expose themselves to those state hate crime laws and to the Kkk Act.
Could you characterize, you really have, but could you recharacterize the Kkk Act for us? What does it say?
The Kkk Act makes it a violation for two or more people to conspire together to commit racially motivated violence. with the intention of depriving that racial minority of exercising their constitutional rights.
And it dates from when?
It's a Reconstruction statute. I think it's 1865 or 67. And it's been used mostly by the government, by the Department of Justice, to pursue kind of racially motivated violence that the KKK was known for, some other Black aimed violence. It hasn't had much use with anti-Semitism. So this was kind of a new use of the statute.
When I think of the plaintiffs, could you describe the plaintiffs to us? College students?
College, for the most part, college students, law student, one of the clergy in Charlottesville who organized some of the counter protesters, some young millennials that went to the counter protest Saturday afternoon, away from where the white supremacist rally was going on. In the car was driven into a group of people that had just organized in a totally different part of downtown Charlottesville, blocks and blocks away from where the white supremacists were having a rally. And they were just, they came out in Charlottesville to show support for peaceful protest in Charlottesville. And this one man by the name of James Field drove his car deliberately into them. Now, we proved that that deliberate, willful act of violence was part of the conspiracy. And of course, the defendants said, we didn't know James Field. We weren't organizing car attacks. The fact of the matter is, we proved that in the internet chat room that was used, a platform that was used by these defendants before the events, they were promoting car attacks. And of course, if you followed the news in the last couple of years, car attacks on peaceful protesters has become a form of violence that white nationalists and others have used against counter protesters. So we actually proved to the jury that car attack was part of the conspiracy.
Now, there wouldn't have been a trial if it wasn't for the bravery of the plaintiffs.
Right.
I find it quite extraordinary. They hadn't been hardened by their experiences with the Gambino family. And from what I've heard from some of the witnesses, it was a terrifying experience for them.
Yeah, and most of them were young. Today, some of them are 25, 26. The defendants were most aggressive. The two that represented themselves were most aggressive at the younger defendants. They lost a lot of their privacy because in order to participate in the case, they had to be willing to turn over all their electronic data and information. They testified with their full names. They were forced by some of these defendants to identify their friends. People were worried about doxing and other kinds of harassment. You can think somebody like me and my colleagues had a lot of courage to do this case. The real courage was the plaintiffs. who first of all got injured, having no intention at those events of committing violence against anybody, and then had some injuries that really they're living with to this day, and some of them will live with for the rest of their lives, and has altered the kind of education that they got and some of the jobs that they're able to do. So, and there are people that we talked to that were unwilling to be plaintiffs. So it took a lot of courage to be a plaintiff in this case.
Good question. So where does it stand now? What are the prospects of, first of all, it's on appeal?
Well, first we have to get the judgment entered by the district court, by the trial judge, and that's going to involve a certain legal process of motions to do that. And then it'll be on appeal, and then hopefully the judgment will be affirmed, and then we'll go try to collect the money, the damages that were awarded. I'm sure there'll be some battles in bankruptcy court. One of the defendants has already tried to invoke protection of personal bankruptcy. This will involve litigation because a judgment arising out of an intentional tort, and these were intentional torts that are violence, are generally not protected by the bankruptcy statute. So we're hopeful that we will overcome any bankruptcy objection and do our best to collect the damages for these plaintiffs.
Now, this is far from the first time that you've done pro bono work on behalf of social justice and all sorts of worthy causes. What motivates you or motivated you to spend so much time and on this and expose yourself to potential violence? Where does it come from?
Our religion. I was sitting in shul when I said I'd like to do this case. It's actually fitting for it explains why I did what I did. I think it's in our tradition, and I'm at a senior level now. I've tried cases for almost 50 years. Who should try this case? Somebody who's got 10 years of experience and can't stand up to them. I think what these people did deserved people with real experience to challenge them. It was a great opportunity that I had to be one of the people to do it.
Very commendable, as I'm sure we'll all agree. I kind of got the feeling that this was sort of almost another day in the office for you, that this was not particularly difficult for you to do, that you had the appropriate experience and expertise, and you just knew what needed to be done.
Yes.
You went out and you did it.
Yes, yes. Except, these people are not saying nice things about me, and my family and my people, it kind of offended me. Now you have to, if you get in the courtroom and you're cross-examining them, and you get all wrapped up in the personal animosity of it all, then you're really not going to do the job that you're supposed to do. So you got to leave that outside the courtroom. Although the way these defendants talked about me on the internet after, I guess I didn't hide my contempt for them too well, because they talked a lot. They talked a lot about it, but in a sense, it was another day in the office. In a sense, it's a real moment in my career, in my professional life. Just an opportunity that I'm grateful, really grateful that I had. I wouldn't have given this up for anything.
Well, we're very, very grateful that you feel this way and that you did so. What
Chuck,
would you say?
I'm sorry. There are a couple questions just to let you know.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. Have other lawyers come forward saying, "Can we get involved?" What would you say to your fellow lawyers?
Oh, I'm preaching all the time because I'm also, as you said, very involved in the Legal Aid Society, which really is providing legal services for poor people. I think this is part of being a lawyer. I assume doctors on some level feel the same way about treating patients who are less fortunate. For me, these are kind of fundamental rights and constitutional rights that are guaranteed. And if people are out there trying to violate those rights, lawyers should be standing up to fight it and to say, no, 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 you're not getting away with that. And to make them defend themselves. What's the piece that gave me the greatest joy, professional joy, and I never had this really with any other witness in any other case, was forcing these people with these virulent anti-Semitic views to answer a question from me, forcing them to account and admit to what they did, and being able to show how deceitful on one level their answers were, and how vile on another level their answers were, so that all of us in the public can actually see this for what it is and act accordingly.
Noemi, those questions?
Yeah. It's two questions I'm going to put in one. Where does the 26 million come from? And do you think anyone will ever see any of that money? Was the family of Heather Heyer included in the lawsuit?
So the family of Heather Heyer was not a plaintiff in the lawsuit. The 26 million is a combination of two basic buckets. One is what's called compensatory damages, which were actually the damages arising from the actual injuries, the medical bills, the lost wages, etc., which varies from plaintiff to plaintiff. And then amounts of punitive damages, which were awarded by the jury, which are permitted in this kind of case. And it's a statement by the jury of an amount of money that's intended to punish the conduct and discourage others from committing it. So both amounts will be on appeal, and we'll go try to collect whatever the judgment is that's affirmed.
I think we have time for, I'm sorry, do you have another thing?
Go ahead. What was the atmosphere in the Charlottesville area during the trial? Public opinions there?
The trial was covered every day in the Charlottesville newspaper. From talking to people, shop owners, restaurant owners, the people in the coffee shops, when they learned like what we were doing, there was enormous gratitude. This rally and the injuries really create a real cloud over Charlottesville for a number of years. And I think generally the public looked at this trial as vindication and judgment time for these defendants. So there weren't any rallies. There weren't really any demonstrations except for a couple of clergy, including the local rabbi out in front of the courthouse every night. But you could feel a sense of real support for us. The Jewish community there was very supportive of what we were doing and very grateful for what we did.
So there's a couple more interesting questions. What has been the impact of the trial upon the various white supremacist organizations?
It's hard for me to tell. They're still talking on the internet. They're going to have, hopefully have judgments against them. A couple of them have disbanded over the last couple of years from all the activity and litigation against them. So it's a mixed bag.
Didn't some of the same organizations participate in the January 6th insurrection? Do you?
I don't know of any evidence that the couple of defendant organizations that I'm familiar with were involved in January 6th.
And the last question, what was the most challenging aspect of the work trial personally for you?
Most challenging, I don't, it's all trying a case is challenging, it's exhausting, it's exhilarating. The one thing that was just so different was being in an American courtroom where the testimony day in and day out was proof of a racial animus and an anti-Semitic attitude and behavior by a dozen people and organizations. You almost got desensitized to how hateful the words were. It almost after a while didn't have the same impact as it did every day in the beginning. But then at night you would say, wow, were they really saying all of that? Were they really doing that? Were they really chanting that? That's the piece of the evidence that just, it sticks with you.
Well, we need to wind up, and thank you, Alan. I cannot thank you any better than one of the folks on the session tonight. So I'm just going to quote what he said in chat. Thanks for contributing your expertise and brilliance for the betterment of society. Just scrolled on me. I'm inspired by your commitment and example. Dr. James Lee contributed that. So thank you. Be safe.
Thank you.
And next show is going to be on the 27th at 7 p.m. And it's going to be, my guest is going to be Terry Schwartzberg, who has embraced life as an ethical campaigner after moving to Munich, Germany. So he's going to be speaking to us. He's going to be interviewed while he is in Munich. And he's going to describe, among other things, his experience wearing a kippah. For those who are unfamiliar, it's the yarmulke everywhere where life has taken him in Germany and Europe in the last 9 years. And I'm also going to be asking him about the involvement in the project to place a memorial plaque wherever a Holocaust victim lived, also in Europe. So I hope you can join us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Chuck.
Oh, thank you, Alan.
nice,
I knew you were
Nice,
terrific, and I
nice
knew
to
you
visit
would be.
Ann Arbor for the evening.
All right, I look forward to buying you a drink or
Thank
a
you.
deli sandwich at Zingerman's.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Good night.